Last Wednesday we have John Owen, who is the CEO and pastor of Wayside Chapel, joining us. And a little bit about John. He has dedicated his life to the closing gap of inequality, both living and working amongst some of the most disadvantaged communities in Sydney and throughout Melbourne. John is a qualified social worker, and prior to Wayside Chapel, he built his way through the organisation Urban Neighbourhoods of Hope, an international not-for-profit organisation specialising in community development and care coordination for families living in poverty. He joins us today to talk about the power of creating inclusive communities and to discuss the stuff that really matters when it comes to your soul's well-being. So, if you'd like to give me a round of applause, we will welcome John up to the stage.
Thanks. Thanks, Kiara. Thank you, everyone. I'll speak into this because I think there's a bit too much background noise. Thanks for coming along and spending some time. I'm only going to speak for a few minutes. I have to give a quick apology, though, because I work at the Wayside Chapel. Have anyone here heard of the Wayside Chapel? So we've been operating on the streets of King's Cross for about 50 years and recently expanded down to Bondi Beach. So you will have to forgive me because I'm also a preacher at heart, so if I end up getting too preachy, just tell me to shut up, which is fine. And you've just come on at the end of Easter, so I've been talking non-stop, so please forgive me if I do rabbit on. But I just wanted to talk for just 10-15 minutes about what really matters, the stuff that really matters, particularly from where we see it, because where we're located in King's Cross, we're located in a place where we see some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged members of our society alongside some of the most affluent and some of the most well-to-do. And what we see is the real power when we are able to create community. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get rid of my stupid photo. So I don't keep looking. There you go. That's the only other slide I have. What really matters in this life? And I'll just tell you a bit about my story. So I've been living and working with my wife for over 20 years, helping out people who are doing it tough. So we first met when she was running a refuge for women escaping domestic violence. She was cramming women into her flat. We were living in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne at the time, and I was running a house for men seeking asylum and also guys who were trying to get their lives back after being released from prison. And so we first met when she was working there and I was working there. It was about 500 metres apart, those two houses. And when we first met, you could say it was love at first crisis. You know, we hit it off, and then we eventually got engaged. And when we were thinking about somewhere to get married and have a honeymoon, we certainly had different ideas. So I was wanting to go to Hawaii, and she wanted to have our honeymoon in Calcutta. So has anyone been to Calcutta? No, and you would never find it on a honeymoon brochure. It is a pretty full-on place, and it's where Mother Teresa set up her charity. So on honeymoon, because of course she got her way, we went off there and we spent 6 weeks volunteering at a place called the Home for the Dying, and then also in the mornings, and then in the afternoons we'd spend time in an orphanage. And in the Home for the Dying, what happens there is every morning people are usually dropped off who are about to die. There's no government funding or welfare, so people in the last stages are just kind of dumped, particularly with disease. And what I really appreciated there was that the nuns would always give you a lecture every morning, and they'd remind you that they would say, you know what, you don't speak Bengali and they don't speak English, so just make sure every action and every interaction you have with this person through the last moments of their life communicate that they're loved. Well, that's pretty simple. That's a way to make a difference, and people really felt that tangible difference. And so we would go from the Home for the Dying, and in the afternoons we'd head to the orphanages. And the orphanages the orphanage there was pretty full on. You soon fall in love with these beautiful little babies that are somehow found and brought to the orphanage. And during one of the tea breaks, we were talking to one of the nuns who was really looked really proppy on her legs, really sore, and we were asking, what's the matter with your legs? And she said, oh, I get sick of running. And we said, oh, it sounds a bit weird when you hear about a nun who's having a run. And so we asked her, what do you run? Are you a jogger? And she laughed and she said, no, every morning we get together, a group of us, 5 or 6 nuns, we head down to the local railway station. And she said, so in the middle of Calcutta is a railway station called Howrah Railway Station. It's the busiest railway station in the world in terms of the numbers of people that come and go every day. And she said, look, every day we run around because every morning there's a chance through poverty or desperation or assault, or usually a combination of all of those factors, a young woman will abandon a newborn baby on the platform and catch a train and leave. And she said, we run around that station every morning looking, because we're not the only people looking for that baby. And so she said, the other people looking for it are the ones who run the gangs. So she said, every morning I know I'm sore, but that's why I get up. I have a sense of purpose in my life. I know why I'm doing this. So she would go around and they would run, and she said, look, if we find the babies, they have a beautiful life. They get loved, they get educated, they get taught a trade, they'll be given a job, and they'll be given a community for life. And, you know, and your job here is just, and our job is to love them. And they said, if we don't win, then what happens is pretty brutal. For the next 10 or 12 years, they'll be sold until they can no longer be sold, and then they'll end up at the home for the dying. And I tell you what, when you have experiences like that, it really brings a sharp clarity and focus to what matters in life, doesn't it? And so that just hit us right in the eyes. And we thought, well, that's the kind of way we want to live our lives, is to be able to care for others, our families and our communities and our world. The other thing when you spend time in Calcutta is you often get exposed to some of Mother Teresa's posters and quotes. And the thing that really shocks us is she would always say that the West needed her far more than the lepers of Calcutta. And what did she mean by that? The other thing she used to often say was loneliness is the leprosy of the West. Right? There's something about the Western world. Since moving into King's Cross, I have had to bury so many people well before their time. And it's not just drug overdoses, and it's through this despair that comes from a sense of isolation and hopelessness. And I've got to tell you that does not discriminate across socio-economic boundaries. I've buried kids who have had nothing, and I've buried kids who have had everything, and all in between. You know, Google recently released 6 months ago worldwide data on what we search for, and Aussies, we top the list in one area. And often, if I ask people to guess what that area was, can anyone guess what it is? It's not porn. So, fortunately, can you? Anyone want to guess what it is? What was it?
Mental health.
Mental health. Very good. We are the number one per capita. If there's any accountants in the room, they're probably going to correct what I just said. We're the number one country in the world who searches the following: how do I cope with a panic attack while I'm still at work? But for a country that likes to think of itself as laid back and relaxed and she'll be right, mate, we're not doing too well. You know, we are dying from a lack of connection and isolation. So that's what we say about at Wayside. Our community is just about, our mission is about building community with no us and them. How do we create connections? Because that's something that will make us all flourish. So we say no one is a problem to be solved, they're a person to be met. We have people walking through our doors on the worst day of their lives. And we don't try, you see, that's the thing about our society is even that sense of isolation that we have, even the ways we've come up to help people often just reinforces the problem, doesn't it? Someone says, oh, I'm struggling, and most welfare agencies or charities talk about saying, here's a pill, or here's a program, or here's a pamphlet. And you walk away feeling more isolated and in more despair than when you walked into the place too. And so how can we change that? How do we create community, and how can we create connections? There's an Aboriginal activist named Lila Watson, and she has this wonderful quote, and it's that if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because somehow your liberation is tied up with mine, then let's work together. I think that's a really powerful statement, to say it isn't just about us fixing others. You know, it's about something about rediscovering what really matters in life. How can we practice the things that really make a difference in our lives? You know, we're starting to see more and more social inequality and the impacts of it. So we're seeing more and more. So 40, 50 years ago, basically through our operations, you know, your average aggregate of what a homeless person would be is a man in their mid-40s to mid-50s. That is changing. If you come to us now, you will see a mix, 50-50, you'll see men and women some days. We're seeing more middle-aged, late-aged women falling into homelessness. Particularly, you know, they've spent 2-3 decades not banking super while raising kids, and then hubby comes home and says, I'm off with the secretary, and these women are too embarrassed often, or too ashamed to have to rely on their children. So the profile and the face and the nature of what we're seeing is starting to change. And so we need actually more opportunities to be able to look at ways we can address some of the issues that are walking through our door. I'll tell you some scary statistics is the average Australian now has about 8 weeks savings in the bank. So you can go from being a soccer mum to being on the street within 8 weeks if there is some sort of serious emergency or catastrophe or mental health episode in your family. And it's about, but I have seen people with way more than 8 weeks savings go from the penthouse to the gutter really quickly. So a couple of months ago, I had a man come in and he was in a tailor-made suit, and I thought he was here to write me a big check, and I was pretty excited. But when the doors closed, he told me the story, which was, he said, look, he lives in Double Bay and he looks out on the water and he's worked really hard. And he said he often would look at everyone who was sleeping on the streets of King's Cross and think about, and often look at them judgmentally, saying, look, how on earth did they end up in that position? But he pretty quickly learnt, because his wife had been telling him, he realised for quite a while, you need to spend more time with me and you need to spend more time with your kids or I'm going to leave. But he just wasn't heeding it because, us blokes were pretty thick, right? And he just said, look, as long as I'm providing for you, everything's okay, right? Then he came home about a month ago and everyone was gone. Everyone had cleared out. And he just said his world started to reel. And he realised that, and he started to walk the streets, and it was, about midnight by this time, and he caught himself and he was under one of the bridges where some of our guys sleep for the night. And he said he realised if home is where the heart is, then he is just as homeless as any guy sleeping under a bridge. How do we invest in the things that matter? Clive Hamilton tells the story in his book, Affluenza. Has anyone read Affluenza? Anyway, as a merchant banker who lived in Wallara, and his wife was hassling him to spend more time with his son. And what happened was eventually he took his son out on the harbour for the day on his boat that he never used, but he had. And as they spent the day together, the son recalls this as the greatest moment of his life, spending one-on-one, uninterrupted time with his dad. What happened later was, sadly, tragically, 4 weeks later, Dad had a massive heart attack and dropped dead. And the son was there clearing out his desk at work, and he found his dad's work diary on his desk. And he noticed that his dad not only recorded his appointments, but recorded his thoughts and impressions for the day in his journal. And he eagerly flipped 4 weeks back to the day he spent on the water with his dad. And in big marker across the whole day was written the words, "A complete waste of a day." All right. When we talk about the poverty and isolation and desperation that walks through our doors, we are talking about something that affects us all. How do we invest in? There's a great book, I recommend it to you all, called Lost Connections. It's by a guy called Johan Hari, and he talks about how we've, when I said we talk about when someone's struggling, we say, here's a pill. He says, and personally, I've got to tell you, as someone who has family members and a wife and a daughter who are on medications for mental health, I think we have gotten too far along that road of medicating, and I think what we need to do is balance it. How do we invest holistically in our lives? We are, and forgive me if I get too religious, we are creatures that are made up of not just our physical bodies, but we have a spiritual element that we need to be feeding. We need to be connecting with the nature out in the natural world. We need to build in regular practices of connection because of the disconnection that we are feeling across the place. So, how can we? So I just want to give you a few tips, is how can we practice connection? I think we need to be investing in the relationships that matter. I so often see people who have climbed up the ladders of success only to find that they were stuck up against the wrong walls. What really matters? Who really matters to you? It takes a disaster for us to realise what we had in our lives. So it's about relationships. It's about spending time with family. It's about disconnecting from our phones. We currently have, the average Australian male has 250 Facebook friends, and yet in a crisis, we often led to the, if you said, who could you call in a crisis, we get down to 2. And often as blokes, we're overestimating that number by about 2, aren't we? So I just want to say, look, it's been a real honour to share with you, but I just wanted to impress on you that what really matters in life is what really matters. And we need to spend some time thinking through that carefully and investing in those relationships, because the worst thing that we can see is when you invest in the wrong place. You always get a return on your investment, don't you? And it's important that we can continue to make sure we're investing in the things that matter, in relationships, in connections, in community, all these buzzwords. You know, labour used to be far more about the body 100 years ago, and I think in the last 20 years we've made it about the head, but in the next 20 years and into the future, labour's going to be all about the heart, and how can we preserve and protect our heart. And that's kind of all I wanted to share with you. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate you coming in to talk about what really matters.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I'm also guilty of spending a bit too much time on my phone and, you know, not spending as much time as I want with my loved ones. So it was really inspiring, and a really good takeaway for me, I guess, is to spend more time with people that matter to me and to just have some time to switch off and think about it. So now I'd like to open up to questions if anyone wanted to ask you a question.
Do you know the DSM-5 is about to add, do you know what the DSM is? The Diagnostic Statistic Manual for Mental Health. So there's 4, and every couple of years it's a huge tome where every kind of mental health problem is listed. One of the ones they're proposing to add into the newest version is a condition where people are stuck and lost inside social media bubbles. So that means, I don't know if you've ever seen someone who lives on Instagram, and you will see their persona comes out in their little videos. What are the videos called? I'm showing how old I am.
Stories.
You know what?
The stories.
Yeah, so people live inside their stories and they project to the world. But then if you actually approach them and say hi, they collapse because they're stuck inside that bubble. And so that's actually going to be one of the new mental health disorders. Instagram. Look out.
Well, if everyone would like to give me a round of applause. We got a question?
We got a question.
How can people here get more involved in, say, what Wayside does? I know that you run outdoor walks, and I mean, there's lots and lots of events. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Oh, great question. So, you know, we're in King's Cross, so if any of you live close by, we're also in Bondi Beach, you can get involved. So if you go on the website, we run walks. So 15% of our staff used to sleep rough. And through getting back on track and getting back into life, we have them as full-time employees now, which we're pretty proud of that. So we offer Wayside Walks. So we have 2 social corporate educators. You can sign up on Friday nights. There's a Wayside Walk with Andrew. And then we also have corporate volunteering days where you'll come in from about 9 till about 2:30, and you'll come and get a tour of our facility in King's Cross, and you get to cook a meal. You'll see our philosophy is we don't try and fix people, we try and meet people, because we say if people walk away feeling met rather than worked on, it's been a good day. And what we find is when people really work out for the first time, what we often say is people whose lives are collapsing are driven by 2 questions. You know, what's the most you can give me, and what's the most I can get for the least, right? And you don't have to be homeless to be driven by those 2 questions, do you? We know that a life is about to turn around when that question changes to what can I give and what can I contribute. And we see people coming to life from all walks of life, because once people realise that they aren't alone, the thing that unites everyone walking through the door is they think that the shit they're dealing with is completely unique to them and the history of the world, but it's not. And when people get walked with, they began to move towards life and health by themselves. So come along, and people come often to help and realise that it's been a part of their life that they've been missing. And we have people who come and volunteer with us once a month, 4 or 5 times a year, or some come weekly as well. I really encourage you to come, and there are worse ways to spend 3 hours as opposed to binging Netflix, which I do too sometimes. All right.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks. Thanks, Kiara. Thanks, everyone.